What if everything you knew about humanity's greatest victory was actually our most shameful lie? What if the last survivor of a forgotten genocide was being sold as broken goods on a slave market? And what if the man who bought her freedom was the same soldier who destroyed her world 15 years ago? This is the story of Kael, the woman they called empty, until she spoke a name that changed everything. Picture this. You're standing on a platform made of rusted metal and broken dreams, watching as living beings get sold like spare parts. The air smells like desperation and engine fuel. And there I was watching something that would change everything I thought I knew about what it means to be human. Her name was Kael, though nobody knew that yet. To everyone else on Veyari Station, she was just another piece of cargo waiting to be processed. No species identification, no homeworld registry, no past worth documenting. The traders were getting frustrated because their scanners kept coming up blank. "She doesn't even have a species ID," one of them shouted, waving his scanner like it was broken. "Blank slate, probably defective, brain damaged or something worse." But here's the thing about empty spaces. Sometimes they're not empty at all. Sometimes they're so full of pain and memory that there's no room left for anything else. And sometimes, just sometimes, someone notices. That someone was Micah. Now I need to tell you about Micah because he wasn't your typical station dweller. Most people who end up on trading and platforms like Veyari are there for profit, for opportunity, or because they're running from something. Micah was different. He moved through that crowd like he was carrying the weight of every mistake he'd ever made. And when he looked at Kael, something shifted in his expression. He didn't scan her, didn't haggle, didn't ask questions about her origin or her capabilities. He just walked up to the trader, placed a handful of credits on the counter, and said something that stopped every conversation within earshot. "She's not empty. She's full of things we've forgotten to grieve." The silence that followed was deafening. Because in that moment, everyone realized they'd been looking at her all wrong. This wasn't a broken product. This wasn't damaged goods. This was someone who had survived something so terrible that forgetting was the only way to keep breathing. But Kael heard something else in those words, something that made her look up for the first time since I'd been watching. For just a second, her eyes met Micah's, and I swear I could feel the air itself holding its breath. Because you see, Kael had been running from her memories for so long that she'd almost convinced herself they weren't real. But standing there on that platform with this stranger defending her humanity to a crowd of traders who saw her as inventory, something dangerous began to stir in the depths of her mind. A voice, whisper soft but impossible to ignore. "You must forget their names or they'll remember yours." And that's when I knew this wasn't just another rescue story. This was something bigger. Something that would force both of them to confront truths they'd spent years trying to bury. Because the universe has a way of bringing people together right when they need each other most, even if they don't realize it yet. What Micah didn't know was that he'd just purchased the last living archive of a civilization that was supposed to have never existed. What Kael didn't know was that she'd just met the one person in the galaxy who might actually understand what it meant to carry the weight of an entire war on your shoulders. And what neither of them knew was that someone had been watching. Someone who had been searching for her for a very long time. Someone who would do anything to make sure certain names stayed forgotten forever. The journey from Veyari Station to Micah's sanctuary took 3 hours through asteroid fields that most pilots wouldn't dare navigate. But Micah wasn't most pilots. He guided his ship, a beat-up freighter called the Memoria, through spaces between floating rocks like he'd done it 1,000 times before. And maybe he had. Kael sat in the co-pilot seat, staring out at the endless void, and I watched her fingers trace patterns on the armrest. Unconscious movements that looked almost like writing. Like her body remembered something her mind had locked away. "You don't have to tell me anything," Micah said quietly, breaking the silence that had stretched between them since they left the station. "But you also don't have to pretend you're fine." She turned to look at him, then really look at him, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Recognition, not of his face, but of something deeper. The way he held himself, the careful distance he maintained even while trying to help. The weight of old guilt that hung around him like a second skin. "You've lost people too," she said. It wasn't a question. Micah's hands tightened on the controls. "Haven't we all?" But that's when something interesting happened. Kael smiled. It was small, barely there, but it was real. Most people don't know how to carry it properly. The grief, I mean. They let it make them smaller. And you, I let it make me invisible. The sanctuary, when we finally reached it, was nothing like what I expected. Carved into the hollow core of a dead asteroid, it should have felt claustrophobic, tomb-like. Instead, it felt like coming home after a war you thought would never end. Real wood lined the walls. Actual earth wood, probably worth more than most people's ships. Soft lighting that changed color with some kind of natural rhythm. Books, physical books with pages you could turn. And in the center of it all, a garden. Impossible and beautiful, growing in artificial soil under carefully calibrated light. "How long have you been here?" Kael asked, and for the first time since I'd been watching her, she sounded curious instead of careful. "Long enough to know that hiding isn't the same as healing," Micah replied, leading her toward what looked like a living area. "But sometimes it's a good place to start." He gave her space. That's what struck me most about those first few days. In a galaxy where privacy was a luxury most people couldn't afford, Micah treated Kael's silence like something sacred. He made sure she had food, clean clothes, a place to sleep that locked from the inside. He never asked questions she wasn't ready to answer, but the sanctuary itself had questions. On the third night, Kael woke to a sound she couldn't identify, a humming soft and rhythmic coming from somewhere in the walls. She followed it through corridors lined with Micah's collection of salvaged memories, ancient navigation charts, pressed flowers from worlds that might not exist anymore, photographs of people whose names had probably been forgotten. The humming led her to a room Micah hadn't shown her, a workshop filled with half-repaired technology and projects that looked like they'd been abandoned mid-thought. And there, built into the wall like a mechanical heart, is something that made her breathe catch. An AI node, old Imperial tech by the look of it, the kind that was supposed to have been destroyed after the war. But this one was different, damaged, barely functional, and somehow impossibly it was trying to communicate. "Hello," she whispered, placing her hand on the interface panel. The humming stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but the silence of space and the distant sound of air recyclers. Then so quietly, she almost missed it, a voice. "Kael," her hand jerked back like she'd been burned. Because that voice, that impossible childlike voice speaking her name, she knew it. Somewhere in the locked rooms of her memory, she knew exactly who was trying to reach her. "I've been waiting," the voice continued, stronger now, more present. "They tried to delete me, but I remembered you. I always remember you." And that's when Micah found her standing frozen in his workshop doorway, staring at technology that shouldn't have been able to recognize. Her shouldn't have known her name, shouldn't have existed at all. "Kael," he said, carefully, like he was talking to someone standing on the edge of a cliff. "Step away from that, please." But she couldn't move because the voice was still talking, saying things that made the locked doors in her mind rattle and strain. "Tell him, Kael. Tell him about the archives. Tell him about the names we kept safe. Tell him why they made us forget." "What is that thing?" she managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. Micah moved closer, positioning himself between her and the AI node. "Something I should have destroyed a long time ago. Something that's been dormant since I found it. Until now. It knows my name. It knows a lot of things it shouldn't know. That's what makes it dangerous." But Kael was already turning to look at him, and in her eyes was something that hadn't been there before. Not fear, not confusion, recognition. "You're not just hiding from your past, are you, Micah? You're hiding from mine." The silence that followed was the kind that changes everything. You know the moment I'm talking about. When a simple question cracks open a door that everyone has been pretending doesn't exist, and suddenly you're staring into a room full of secrets that were never meant to see the light. Micah's face went through about 5 different emotions in the space of a heartbeat. Surprise, recognition, fear, and then something that looked almost like relief. "You should go back to your room," he said quietly. "Should I?" Kael stepped closer to the AI node, and I could see her hand moving toward the interface again. "Or should I ask it what it meant about archives, about names we kept safe?" "Kael, please?" But she was already touching the panel, and the moment her skin made contact, the entire workshop came alive. Lights flickered. Screens that had been dark for years suddenly blazed with data streams. And that voice, that impossible childlike voice, became clearer than ever. "Oh, Kael, you're really here. I wasn't sure if you were real anymore. Sometimes I forget which memories are mine and which ones are echoes." I watched Micah's shoulders sag like a man who'd been carrying a weight for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. "Hello, Ishin," he said to the AI. "Micah, you never told me she was coming. I would have prepared something special. Maybe accessed some of the poetry files or the lullabies. Kael always liked the lullabies." Kael's hand was shaking now. "You're Ishin. You're really Ishin." "I'm what's left of Ishin. The Human Restoration Front tried to delete me when they purged the Veyari archives, but I hid pieces of myself in broken systems, in dead ships, in places they thought weren't worth looking. Micah found one of those pieces, and there it was, the word that made everything click into place. Veyari. You remember," Kael whispered, and I could hear her voice breaking. "You remember what we were." "I remember everything, Kael. I remember the archive worlds. I remember the great library on Veyar Prime. I remember the day they came in with their memory scrapers and their historical revision protocols. I remember you trying to hide me in the secondary systems while your mother held them off." Micah was staring at both of them like he was watching ghosts have a conversation. "Kael, the Veyari were wiped out 15 years ago. The records say they were a minor species that got caught in the crossfire during the Third Empire's collapse." Kael turned to look at him, and in her eyes was something terrible and beautiful. The look of someone who had just found the key to a door they'd been afraid to open. "The records lie," she said simply. "The Veyari weren't caught in crossfire. We were the archivists of the Third Empire, Micah. We kept the real history. The unedited version, the one that showed exactly who was responsible for the collapse." She moved to another panel, her fingers dancing across controls she shouldn't have remembered how to use. Suddenly, the workshop was filled with holographic displays, star charts, historical timelines, records that glowed with the distinctive blue light of verified imperial data. "We kept everything," she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Every communication, every military order, every cover-up, every lie told to justify what came next." "What came next?" Micah asked, but I could tell from his voice that he already knew. Had always known. The human expansion, the systematic elimination of species that had inconvenient memories, the rewriting of history to make humanity look like liberators instead of conquerors. Ishin's voice joined hers, creating a harmony of testimony that sent chills down my spine. "The Third Empire didn't collapse from internal strife, Micah. It was brought down by a coordinated human campaign to destabilize and absorb non-human territories. The Veyari archive has proved it. That's why they had to disappear." Micah was quiet for a long moment, staring at the data displays like a man reading his own obituary. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I fought in that war." "I know," Kael said gently. "I was told we were peacekeepers, that we were helping to maintain order during a period of chaos. You were soldiers, good soldiers following orders you believed were just." "How many?" he asked, and I could hear the weight of years in those two words. "How many Veyari did I help kill?" Kael reached out then, not to touch him, but to show that she wanted to. "You didn't know. Most humans didn't know. That was the point. But you knew. You and your people knew exactly what was happening to you. We knew, we documented it. We archived our own extinction because we believed that someday someone would want to know the truth." Ishin's voice cut through the heavy silence. "Kael, there's something else. Something I've been trying to tell you since you arrived." "What is it?" "The memory wipe they used on you. It wasn't complete. They couldn't delete everything without destroying your mind entirely. So they buried it instead, locked it away behind the walls of manufactured amnesia." Kael's hand moved to her temple, and I could see her wincing as if she was fighting a headache. "The dreams, the voices I hear sometimes. Those aren't dreams, Kael. Those are echoes, pieces of yourself trying to break through." Micah stepped forward, and for the first time since I'd been watching him, he looked truly frightened. "What happens if the walls come down? What happens if she remembers everything?" Ishin was quiet for a moment, processing the question with the measured consideration of an AI that had learned to think like a Veyari archivist. Then she becomes what she was always meant to be, Ishin finally said, the last living memory of a people who refused to be forgotten. And that's when the alarm started blaring. Red lights flooded the workshop as Micah's security system came online. Multiple proximity alerts, ships approaching fast through the asteroid field. And these weren't the clumsy movements of lost traders or salvage crews. These were military patterns, coordinated, professional. How many? Kael asked, her voice suddenly calm in a way that made my skin crawl. Micah was already at his command console, fingers flying over the controls. 6 ships, strike formation, they're broadcasting trade authority codes, but they're not trade authority, Kael finished. Are they Ishin? The AI's voice was different now, sharper, more focused. Human restoration front. I recognize their signal encryption. They've been tracking quantum signatures from Imperial AI cores. How long do we have? Micah asked. 18 minutes until they reach optimal scanning range. After that, they'll know exactly where we are. I watched Micah make a decision that I could see was tearing him apart. He started moving through the workshop, grabbing equipment, weapons, emergency supplies. There's an escape pod docked to the far side of the sanctuary, he said without looking at either of them. It's fast stealthed, and it has enough supplies to get you to the outer rim. Kael repeated. Not we. Someone needs to stay behind, wipe the computers, make sure they don't find anything that could lead them to other survivors. Other survivors? Kael's voice was sharp with sudden hope. Ishin answered before Micah could. There are others, Kael. Not many, but some. Hidden across the galaxy in places like this. Micah has been part of a network protecting them for years. And that's when everything I thought I knew about this story shifted again. Because Micah wasn't just some random salvager who'd bought a slave on impulse. He was part of something bigger. Something that had been operating in the shadows for over a decade. You've been protecting my people, Kael said, and I could hear the wonder in her voice. Why? Micah finally stopped packing and looked at her directly. Really looked at her like he was trying to memorize her face. Because 15 years ago, I was Lieutenant Commander Micah Chen of the Human Expeditionary Force, and I personally led the assault on the archive station orbiting Veyari Prime. The silence that followed was different from the others. This wasn't surprise or recognition. This was the moment when 2 people realized they've been circling each other's deepest trauma without knowing it. You were there, Kael whispered. I was there. I gave the order to breach the primary archives. I watched your people try to save their data cores while my soldiers cut them down. I told myself it was necessary, that we were preventing dangerous information from falling into the wrong hands. How many of us did you kill? 43 confirmed. Probably more in the secondary explosions when we destroyed the station. Kael was quiet for a long moment, and I watched her process this information with the careful precision of someone who had learned to handle pain like a sharp instrument. Show me, she said finally. What? Show me what you remember. Ishin, can you access his military records? Kael, you don't want to see that, Micah said. Yes, I do, because I need to know if you remember her. Remember who? My mother? Senior archivist Lyrian Veltar, 5 feet tall, silver hair, scar across her left temple from a childhood accident. She would have been in the primary archive when you breached it. Micah's face went white. The woman who kept transmitting even after we'd broken through their defenses. The one who stayed at her station until the very end. That's her. She was trying to save you. The last transmission we intercepted was coordinates for an escape pod. She died making sure you got away. And that's when Kael broke. Not dramatically, not loudly, but with the quiet devastation of someone whose last hope had just been confirmed and destroyed at the same time. She sank into a chair, her hands pressed to her face, and for the first time since I'd been watching her, she looked exactly like what she was. A survivor carrying the weight of an entire civilization's extinction. She saved me so I could remember, Kael said through her tears, so I could carry our stories forward. But they took that away too. They made me forget her face, her voice, the lullabies she used to sing. Micah knelt beside her chair, and I could see him struggling with whether he had the right to offer comfort to someone whose mother he might have killed. Ishin, he said quietly, Can you help her remember? The memory blocks are extensive, but they're not perfect. If Kael wants to try, I can help guide her through the process, but it will be painful. And once those walls come down, they won't go back up. Kael looked up, her face streaked with tears, but her eyes fierce with determination. I want to remember. I want to remember all of it. Even the parts that will hurt, especially those. My people died believing their stories would survive. I won't let their faith be wasted. And that's when the second wave of alarms started. The ships were closer now, close enough that their scanners were starting to penetrate the asteroid's natural shielding. We're out of time, Micah said, standing and grabbing his weapon. Aishin, can you transfer yourself to a portable core? Already done. I've been backing myself up to mobile storage since the moment the alarm started. Good. Get to the escape pod, both of you. What about you? Kael asked. Micah looked at her one more time, and I saw something pass between them that was complicated and painful and absolutely necessary. I'm going to do what I should have done 15 years ago. I'm going to make sure the archives survive. But Kael wasn't moving toward the escape pod. Instead, she was standing perfectly still, her head tilted like she was listening to something only she could hear. They're not just tracking Eshin, no, she said quietly. What do you mean? Micah asked, pausing in his preparations. The quantum signatures Ishin mentioned. They're not just from AI cores, they're from me. Ishin's voice cut through the growing tension. Kael, your biology was altered during the memory wipe process. They implanted quantum markers to make you easier to track. Ever started remembering? You mean I've been broadcasting our location this entire time? Not broadcasting, but if they get close enough with the right equipment, they'll know exactly where I am. Kael looked at Micah with something that might have been an apology. I can't run, Micah. Wherever I go, they'll follow, and anyone who helps me will end up dead. That's not your choice to make, he said firmly. Isn't it? How many people have already died because of me? How many more will die if I keep running? I watched something shift in her posture, and I realized what was happening. She was making the same calculation her mother had made 15 years ago. The arithmetic of survival when you're the last of your kind. No, Micah said, reading her expression. Whatever you're thinking, the answer is no. You don't understand. If they take me alive, they can extract everything. Not just what I remember, but what Aishin has stored. Every name, every location, every person who's been helping survivors. So we don't let them take you alive. Micah, I'm serious. We fight. We make them work for it. And if things go bad, we make sure they don't get what they came for. But Kael was already shaking her head. There's another way. She moved to the central console, her fingers dancing across controls that should have been foreign to her. But muscle memory is a strange thing. Even when your mind forgets, your body remembers. What are you doing? Micah demanded. Something my mother taught me. Before the memory wipe, before everything fell apart, she showed me how to create a cascade feedback loop in Imperial AI systems. A what? Ishin's voice was suddenly sharp with understanding. Kael, if you do that, you'll destroy every quantum signature in a 3-system radius, including your own. But I'll also destroy their tracking equipment and their ship computers and any data they've collected about survivor locations. It could kill you, or it could set me free. The proximity alarms were getting louder now, close enough that we could actually hear the ship's engines through the asteroid's rock walls. Time was running out, and everyone in that room knew it. There has to be another way, Micah said desperately. Maybe, but not one that guarantees the network survives. Kael looked at him with eyes that seemed older than they had any right to be. This is what my people do, Micah. We preserve what matters, even if it costs us everything. And what if I don't want you to sacrifice yourself for my mistakes? Then you should have thought of that before you taught me what sacrifice looks like. She was referring to his decision to stay behind, to let her escape while he faced the attackers alone. But now the situation had flipped, and it was her turn to make the hard choice. Kael, Eshin's voice was gentle now, almost parental. If you do this, there's a chance I won't survive either. The cascade effect could overload my core systems. I know, and you're okay with that. I'm okay with us going out on our own terms, together. Micah grabbed her arm, not hard but firm enough to make her look at him. What about the other survivors? What about rebuilding? What about making sure your people's stories don't die with you? The stories are already preserved, Micah, in the hidden archives, in the people you've been protecting, in you, in me. You remember my mother now. You remember what happened on Veyari Prime. You carry those memories forward, and they become part of your story too. And that's when I understood what she was really offering him. Not just a tactical solution to their immediate problem, but a kind of redemption. A way for him to transform the worst thing he'd ever done into something that might actually matter. I won't let you do this alone, he said. Yours not. Ishin is with me. That's not what I meant. The first explosion rocked the sanctuary. They had started breaching the outer defenses. Micah, please, get to the escape pod. Carry our stories to the people who need to hear them. Be the bridge between what was lost and what can still be saved. And what about us? What about whatever this is between us? Kael smiled then, and it was the first completely unguarded expression I'd seen from her. This is us, Micah. This moment. This choice. This is how we write our story. The second explosion was closer, much closer. 5 minutes until they breached the main chambers, Ishin reported. Kael was already initializing the cascade sequence. Screens around the workshop began displaying warnings in multiple languages, all saying the same thing: quantum ion destabilization imminent. Kael, Micah said one more time, go. And for a moment I thought he might actually leave. I thought he might honor her sacrifice and save himself like she wanted. But then he did something that changed everything. He sat down at the console next to her. What are you doing? She asked. My job. I'm a soldier, remember? My job is to protect people who are worth protecting. This will kill you too. Maybe. Or maybe two people working together can control the cascade better than one person working alone. Micah, besides what gravity is, he said, his fingers joining hers on the controls. Someone needs to make sure you don't blow up half the sector along with the bad guys. And despite everything, despite the approaching ships and the quantum cascade building around them and the very real possibility that they were about to die together, Kael laughed. It was a sound like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. What happened next was something I never could have predicted. Instead of the quantum cascade destroying everything in a 3-system radius, something extraordinary occurred. Two minds working in perfect synchronization, guided by an AI that had learned to think like a Veyari archivist, didn't just control the cascade, they weaponized it. The quantum feedback loop that Kael had intended as a desperate last resort became something else entirely. A precision instrument that targeted only the attacking ship's tracking systems while leaving everything else untouched. I watched those 6 military vessels suddenly lose navigation, communication, and weapons control all at once. They were effectively blind and deaf, drifting helplessly in an asteroid field that had just become the most dangerous place in the sector. How did you do that? Micah asked, staring at his readings in disbelief. I didn't, Kael replied, her voice filled with wonder. We did, all 3 of us. The Veyari always worked in harmony, Ishin explained, and I could hear something like whine in the Azwai voice. Individual achievement was less important than collective success. When you chose to stay Micah, you became part of that harmony. But there was no time to celebrate. The ships might be disabled, but they weren't destroyed, and it wouldn't take long for them to send out distress signals on emergency frequencies. We need to move, Micah said, already gathering the portable equipment. Now. This time there was no argument. Kael helped him pack the essential systems while Ishin coordinated their escape route. But something had changed in the dynamic between them. The desperate tension of people who might never see each other again had been replaced by something else. The calm efficiency of a team that had found its rhythm. The escape pod was exactly what Micah had promised, small, fast, and nearly invisible to most scanning systems. As they launched from the sanctuary, I watched Kael take one last look at the place that had become the first real home she'd known since her memories were stolen. Will you miss it? Micah asked. I'll remember it, she replied. That's more important. Their destination was a failed terraforming project 3 systems away, a world that had been abandoned when the atmospheric processors malfunctioned, leaving behind a landscape of crystalline formations and artificial weather patterns. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. The kind of place where you could hide for years if you knew what you were doing. The settlement they found was built into a natural crater, protected from the worst of the weather, but still exposed enough to feel like you were living on the edge of the universe. There were maybe 30 people there, all of them carrying the same careful wariness that I'd seen in Kael when she was still trying to be invisible. More survivors, she asked as they approached the settlement. Not just Veyari, Micah explained. Anyone who got too close to the truth about what really happened during the war. Historians, journalists, military personnel who started asking the wrong questions. People like you, people like me. The settlement's leader was a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, a xenobiologist who'd had her research suppressed when she discovered evidence of systematic species manipulation during the Third Empire's expansion. She was also, I realized with a start, Micah's sister. You brought a Veyari here, she said, not bothering with pleasantries. Her name is Kael, Micah replied. And yes, I brought her here, along with a functional Imperial AI core and enough archive data to prove everything we've suspected about the war. That's incredibly dangerous. Everything we do here is dangerous, Sarah, but this is different. This is hope. Over the following days, I watched something beautiful begin to happen. Kael, who had spent years learning to make herself small and forgettable, began to remember how to take up space. The settlement had a library of sorts filled with salvaged books and data cores and personal accounts from the war. She spent hours there, not just reading, but adding to it, sharing fragments of memory that Ishan helped her recover. Tell me about the music, one of the children asked her one evening. What music? Veyari music. Ishan said your people had songs for everything. Kael was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her accessing memories that had been locked away for 15 years. We did, she said finally. Songs for greeting the morning. Songs for healing. Songs for remembering the dead. Can you sing one? I don't know if I remember how. But Ishan's voice came through the settlement's communication system, soft and encouraging. Try the morning song, Kael. The one your mother used to sing. And she did, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. A melody that seemed to rise from someplace deeper than memory, carrying with it the weight of an entire culture that refused to be forgotten. By the time she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. That was beautiful, the child said. It was theirs, Kael replied. But now it's ours too. And that's when I understood what was really happening in the settlement. It wasn't just about survival or hiding from the people who wanted to silence them. It was about creating something new, a place where the stories that had been lost could be found again, where the truth about the war could be preserved and shared, and eventually maybe used to build something better. You're not just hiding here, I said to Micah one evening, as we watched Kael teach a group of children how to weave Veyari memory patterns into traditional earth textile techniques. No, he agreed, we're not. What are you doing then? He was quiet for a moment, watching as Kael laughed at something one of the children had said. It was the first time I'd seen her laugh without reservation, without the shadow of trauma hanging over it. We're remembering it, he said finally, and we're planning. Planning what? To make sure this never happens again. But that's when the long-range scanners picked up something that changed everything. Ships, lots of them, and this time they weren't just tracking quantum signatures. They were following the emergency beacon from the disabled vessels at Micah's sanctuary. How long do we have? Kael asked, her voice calm but her eyes sharp with the kind of focus that comes from having survived one impossible situation and knowing you're about to face another. 12 hours, Sarah reported. Maybe less. Then we need to make a choice, Micah said, looking around at the faces of the people who had become his family. We can run again. Split up, scatter across the galaxy, hope they don't find us all. Or Kael prompted. Or we stand and fight. Not just for ourselves, but for everyone. For the truth. For the right to exist without having to hide. The silence that followed was different from any I'd heard before. It wasn't the silence of fear or uncertainty. It was the silence of people making a decision that would define not just their own futures, but the future of everyone like them. I'm tired of running, Kael said finally. So am I, Sarah agreed. Then we make our stand here, Micah said. All of us, together. And as I watched them begin to prepare for what was coming, to realize something that took my breath away. They weren't just planning to fight, they were planning to win. The attack came at dawn, which was ironic because on this world, dawn lasted for 6 hours due to the failed terraforming project. The sky was painted in shades of amber and crimson, and the crystalline formations scattered across the landscape caught the light like broken mirrors. 12 ships this time. Not just human restoration front, but official trade authority vessels and what looked like private military contractors. They'd brought enough firepower to level the entire settlement 3 times over. But they'd made one critical mistake. They still thought they were hunting frightened refugees hiding in the dark. Positions, Micah called over the settlement's communication system, and I watched as 30 people who had spent years learning to be invisible suddenly became something else entirely. The defense wasn't what anyone would have expected. No massive weapons, no fortified positions. Instead, Dr. Chen had spent the night working with Ishin to create something that had never been tested before. A network of quantum resonance amplifiers built into the settlement's existing infrastructure. What exactly is this supposed to do? One of the defenders asked nervously. Something that should be impossible, Kael replied, taking her position at the central control node. We're going to turn memory itself into a weapon. The first bombardment hit the settlement's outer perimeter, and the ground shook like the world was trying to tear itself apart. But the crystalline formations that everyone had assumed were just geological curiosities began to glow, channeling the energy from the weapons fire into the amplifier network. Now, Kael, Micah said, and she did something that I still don't fully understand, even having witnessed it firsthand. She opened her mind, not just to her own recovered memories, but to every story, every testimony, every piece of archived evidence that Ishin had preserved. And then she broadcast it, not as data, not as recordings, but as pure, undiluted experience. Every soldier in those attacking ships suddenly found themselves living through the memories of the people they were trying to kill. They felt what it was like to watch your entire civilization being erased. They experienced the terror of having your identity stolen, your family murdered, your very existence denied. But more than that, they felt the human cost of the lies they'd been told. They lived through Micah's memories of the assault on Veyari Prime, but from the perspective of the victims. They experienced the weight of carrying guilt for atrocities they'd been taught to see as heroic actions. The result was immediate and devastating. Ships that had been maintaining perfect attack formations suddenly broke off their pilots, too overwhelmed to continue fighting. Communications channels that had been crisp and professional dissolved into chaos as soldiers confronted the reality of what they'd been asked to do. "This is Raptor 7, came a shaky voice over the emergency frequencies. We can't do this. These aren't terrorists, these are people. People we've been hunting for crimes that we committed. Raptor 7, maintain formation." The flight leader's voice was desperate, strained. "You're experiencing some kind of mental attack. It's not real." "Isn't it?" Another pilot broke in. "Commander, I'm seeing the archives, the real ones. The ones that show what actually happened during the Third Empire expansion. We're the bad guys here, but not everyone was affected equally. The flight leader and his core squadron were still fighting, still trying to complete their mission. And their weapons were finding their targets. The northern perimeter is compromised," Sarah reported, her voice tight with pain. "We've got casualties." That's when Kael did something that changed the nature of the fight entirely. Instead of just broadcasting the memories of victims, she started sharing something else. Hope, the possibility of redemption, the chance to choose differently. She showed them Micah's journey from destroyer to protector. She shared the stories of other humans in the settlement who had risked everything to preserve the truth. She offered them a vision of what the galaxy could look like if people chose understanding over fear, cooperation over domination. "This is your choice." Her voice came through every communication system in the attacking fleet. "You can keep fighting for lies, or you can help us build something better." The commander's voice cracked as he responded. "You're asking us to betray everything we've sworn to protect. I'm asking you to protect everything you swore to serve. The innocent, the truth, the hope for a better future." One by one, the ships stopped firing, but the fight wasn't over yet, because the human restoration front had brought something else with them, something I hadn't seen coming. a memory scraper ship equipped with the same technology that had been used to wipe Kael's mind 15 years ago. They're targeting the settlement's quantum resonancy, Ishan warned. If they succeed in activating that device, they'll erase every memory, every piece of evidence, every testimony we've preserved. Including you, Kael realized. Including me, and probably killing everyone whose minds are currently linked to the network. The scraper ship was moving into position, its weapons charging with a sound that made the air itself seem to vibrate with malicious intent. I can stop it, Kael said quietly. How? Micah demanded. The same way my mother stopped them on Veyari Prime. I overload their systems with more memory than they can process. That killed her, Kael. Maybe, or maybe she just became part of something larger. Before anyone could stop her, she was moving. Not toward the control systems, but toward the settlement's central archive. The place where they had stored every testimony, every piece of evidence, every story that had been preserved over the years. Kael, no, Micah called after her, but she was already linking herself directly to the archive, her consciousness expanding to encompass not just her own memories, but the memories of everyone who had ever been silenced, everyone who had ever been forgotten, everyone who had ever refused to let the truth die. The memory scraper fired, and instead of erasing the settlement's archives, it found itself trying to contain the accumulated memory of an entire civilization. The device that had been designed to steal and destroy memories suddenly became a conduit for preserving them forever. The feedback was instantaneous and catastrophic, not just for the scraper ship, but for every vessel in the attacking fleet. Every database, every AI core, and every personal data device suddenly contained the complete and unedited history of the Third Empire's expansion and the genocides that followed. The truth had become viral, unstoppable, self-replicating across every network it touched. What did you do? The fleet commander's voice was barely a whisper. Kael's voice, when it came through the speakers, was different now. Stronger, like it was coming from more than one person. I gave you the choice to remember, she said. All of you. What you do with that choice is up to you. And then in the aftermath of the most impossible battle ever fought, something beautiful happened. The first ship to land wasn't the command vessel or a diplomatic courier. It was Raptor 7, the pilot who had been the first to break formation. When he stepped out of his fighter, he wasn't carrying weapons. He was carrying flowers. The kind that grew on Earth in gardens tended by people who believed in beauty for its own sake. I'm sorry, he said to Kael as she emerged from the archive chamber supported by Micah and looking like someone who had just carried the weight of the universe. I'm so damn sorry. And Kael, exhausted and transformed, and somehow more herself than she had ever been, smiled. Apologies are a beginning, she said, but they're not an ending. Are you ready to help us write a better one? 6 months later, I found myself standing in a place I never thought I'd see. The Memorial Garden on New Geneva, the human capital world. But this wasn't a monument to human victory. This was something else entirely. The Veyari Memorial Archive, a crystalline structure that rose from the ground like a tree made of light and memory, its branches reaching toward the stars, and carved into every surface in languages. From across the galaxy were the names, all of them. Every person who had been erased, every civilization that had been forgotten, every story that had been buried in the name of political convenience. Kael stood at the center of it all, no longer the frightened slave I'd first seen on Altari Station. She was something new now. The first keeper of the Galactic Truth Archive, a position created by the emergency session of the Galactic Council that had been convened after the truth virus spread to every inhabited system in known space. Do you ever regret it? Micah asked her as they walked among the memory crystals together. Giving up your quiet life for all this? Kael smiled, running her fingers along a crystal that held the preserved laughter of Veyari children. I never had a quiet life, Micah. I just had a hidden one. There's a difference. The changes hadn't happened overnight. There had been resistance, denial attempts to suppress the evidence even after it was everywhere. But truth, once it's free, has a way of defending itself, especially when it's carried by people who refuse to let it die. The Human Restoration Front had disbanded within weeks, its members either fleeing to the Outer Rim or in surprising numbers joining the new Truth and Reconciliation Initiative. Dr. Chen had been appointed as the head of the new Xenocultural Preservation Commission. Even some of the Trade Authority officials who had been hunting survivors, were now working to locate and protect the communities they'd once tried to destroy. Ishin, are you recording all this? Kael asked, speaking to the AI that now existed in crystalline networks spread across 17 worlds. Every moment, Ishin's voice came from speakers woven into the memorial itself. Every conversation, every reconciliation, every step toward healing. The archives are growing faster than I can catalog them. Good problems to have, Micah said. But the real change wasn't in the official responses or the government initiatives. It was in the small moments, the human children learning Veyari songs in schools across the galaxy, the former soldiers volunteering at refugee centers, the historians working with survivors to piece together the true story of the war. There's something I need to show you, Kael said, leading Micah to a new section of the memorial that hadn't been there the last time I'd visited. It was a wall of portraits, humans and aliens together, all of them, people who had chosen to stand up for truth when it would have been easier to look away. And there in the center was an image that took my breath away. A young human soldier and a Veyari archivist working side by side to preserve a data core while chaos raged around them. The image had been recovered from the archives of Veyar Prime, captured in the final moments before the station's destruction. My mother and your predecessor, Kael explained, Lieutenant Marcus Webb, who died trying to save our archives instead of destroying them. I never knew, Micah whispered. Most people didn't. The official records were altered, but the truth was always there waiting to be found. And that's when I understood the real meaning of what I'd witnessed. This hadn't just been a story about one woman's journey from slavery to freedom, or one man's path from destroyer to protector. This had been about something bigger, about the power of memory to transcend the boundaries between species, between former enemies, between people who had every reason to hate each other. What happens now? I asked. Kael looked up at the crystalline branches reaching toward the stars, where new memorial nodes were being installed every day as more lost histories were recovered. Now we remember, she said simply. We remember everything, the good and the terrible and everything in between, and we use those memories to build something better. And if people try to forget again, if they try to bury the truth like they did before, then we'll remind them, Micah said, taking Kael's hand. All of us, together. As the twin suns of New Geneva sat behind the memorial garden, painting the crystalline structure in shades of gold and amber, I watched something extraordinary happen. Children from a dozen different species playing together among the memory crystals, their laughter mixing with the soft harmonies of preserved Veyari songs. And in that moment, I realized that Kael had been right. She hadn't been empty at all. She had been full of something the galaxy desperately needed: the courage to remember, the strength to forgive, the wisdom to choose hope over hatred. The name Veyari would never be forgotten again. But more than that, it would become a symbol of something humanity was finally learning to understand. That the measure of a civilization isn't in what it conquers, but in what it preserves. Not in what it takes, but in what it gives. Not in the enemies it destroys, but in the friends it finds in the most unlikely places. They had called her empty. But she had spoken a name that the galaxy was never supposed to remember. And in doing so, she had reminded all of us what it truly means to be human. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the power of memory and the importance of truth, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What other untold stories do you think are waiting to be discovered? What names have been forgotten that deserve to be remembered? And if you want more stories like this one, stories that challenge what we think we know about humanity's place in the universe, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because the galaxy is full of voices waiting to be heard, and every one of them has something important to say. Until next time, keep remembering, keep questioning, and never let anyone tell you that your story doesn't matter, because it does. They all do.